Welcome to Demon Dayz, an actual play podcast with a focus on fiends and the friends who play them. If you're listening to this, then there's a good chance you've just found our podcast and are giving it a try. From the bottom of my heart, I want to say thank you, and I hope you enjoy. This show is the result of an immense love of tabletop and tiefling, and the journey so far has been amazing. The reason I'm recording this is to give you a little bit of a primer on what to expect for the podcast ahead and a guide for navigating our slightly non-linear bonus content. First thing to address is the audio issues up front. The first 8 chapters were recorded using a different mic than the ones we use now, and as a result, the episodes sound a little bit echoey and quite a bit tinny. If that's going to be a detriment to catching up to where we are now, then I recommend starting with our recap episode called Interlude, from Rude Awakening to Trost, and then move directly to Chapter 9, Bramran and the Barnacle. Next, you probably noticed that we have bonus journals from our players scattered throughout the feed. These are tied to specific moments in the main show, and feature the characters talking about the plot and their feelings about it up to that point. I recommend you listen to these in the order they're released, and not jump ahead. There's 1 or 2 journals that are tied to the events in the first 8 chapters, but if you check out our interlude like I mentioned earlier, you won't be lost. Also, these journals are supplementary and meant to enrich the story being told at the table. I love when fantasy books do this sort of thing in between their chapters, and I wanted to see how the idea would play out with an actual play podcast itself. Also, as a game master, this gives me a chance to get into my players' heads, and, well, that's pretty awesome. Lastly, this podcast is not tied to one particular tabletop rule set. Campaign 1 uses Dungeons & Dragons because it's the first system I learned how to play. After this first story ends, we will use a completely different set of rules, have a completely new setting, but keep the core elements within the title of our show. Think of it as an actual play podcast version of Final Fantasy. That's all I have for you for now. We're still a young podcast, and it's only through your support and patronage that we will even be able to make it to a second campaign. When the time comes that this information falls out of date, I'll replace this little primer episode with a new one and give you the what's what. Thanks for listening, folks, and welcome to our show.